So I hope we finish this week tonight. I thought it was going to be a quick lesson. They sneak in a lot of information into what looks like a mundane outline. So we'll see what happens. We got to start getting through these at some point. I'm told you're not supposed to do that with the Bible. So, just the textbook. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. We'll pray and we'll get into the lesson. So last week we dealt with basically David's sin and the consequences thereof. So we looked at his sin with Bathsheba, which was adultery that led him to murder. That had a whole series of consequences to it. A lot of that being internal and kingdom-oriented strife. So not only did you have the incident with the one oldest son and his sister, then you had Absalom killing that one son. Eventually, years later, you have Absalom, who is now the oldest son, taking the throne from David, sort of usurping the throne as David is once again forced to flee for his life. And we sort of left it basically there last week, where David is kind of back in hiding, Absalom is on the throne, and we're going, okay, now what? So that's where we left off, and that's where we will continue from, but let's open up in prayer first. Lord, I thank you for this night. I thank you for the ability to come here and study your word. I just pray that you'd be with us during this time. Open our hearts and minds to see things that you would have us see, that help us understand you better and just draw us closer. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Okay, so we will be starting on page 87 in your book. But before we read the book, I'll explain to you what's going to happen. So like we said, Absalom's in Jerusalem. David is hiding, basically. So Absalom is sitting in Jerusalem, and he asks his advisors, so now what? We took the throne, now what do I do? So Absalom has two advisors. One is a man named Ahithophel, trusted advisor. One is a man named Hushai. That was David's advisor, who David said, hey, look, we got to run. You can't do me much good here. You know where you can help me out? Go back to Jerusalem. Be Absalom's advisor. See what you can influence there. So he is kind of David's inside man right now. So Ahithophel, the first actual advisor who's actually trying to do a good job for Absalom, they say, okay, David is across the Jordan. He's there with some men. We have like 12,000 troops here. Let's just send them. This will resolve quickly, no problems. The throne will be yours, totally. Hushai, David's inside man, says, no, we know your father, we know David, and we know his mighty men. They are a brutal fighting force. What's going to happen? You send those 12,000, they're going to slaughter them. They're experienced fighters, and this is going to be a bad way to start your reign. This isn't going to go well. What you need to do is you, Absalom, should start going around the country to gather troops from every tribe. You're going to launch a massive army, whole country against David. This is David's inside man suggesting this. So we're on page 87 in your book. Absalom takes that advice. He says, okay, I'm just going to go with some troops. We're going to launch out to gather this great army. On page 87, probably closer to the bottom, it says, when David learned that Absalom had crossed the Jordan, he quickly organized his fighting men into 3 battalions. David was counseled to lead his men into battle because his officers knew he would be the primary target. He in turn directed them to spare Absalom's life. So what looks like a good mission going out to get more troops actually turns into, well, now Absalom just has a small contingent of men. David and his servants, his troops, now they can actually face him. So David's inside man basically got Absalom to head out without enough support, even though that's not what he said the plan was. Okay, 2 Samuel 16. I'm going to look in, we'll start at, that's not right. Could be 17. Oh no. It's a disaster. 18, verse 6. You guys are crushing it. I was 2 chapters off. I got the verses right. I summarized chapter 17 basically. So, okay. Yeah, chapter 18, verse 6. That this makes sense. So these 2 groups are meeting now. So the people went out into the field against Israel. The battle was in the wood of Ephraim, where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David. So that's how they're characterizing these 2. The people of Israel, they're the men with Absalom, and the servants of David. So the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country, and the woods devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule. And the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between heaven and earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, and said, Behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. Joab said unto the man that told him, And behold, you saw him, and why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? And I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. The man said to Joab, Though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, yet I would not put forth my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against my own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and now thyself wouldest have set thyself against me. Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts, or like small javelins, in his hand, and thrust them through the heart of Absalom, while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom, and slew him. And Absalom blew the trumpet, and Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the woods, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him, and all Israel fled, every one to his tent. So the battle does not go well for Absalom's side. I don't know exactly what is meant by whatever is going on in these woods. These woods are clearly so treacherous that they are taking out like tons of people just from, I don't know exactly what. And I don't know if that's actually killing them or if they're getting injured by, tripping over roots and tree branches and whatnot. But yeah, you have the situation where Absalom is riding through the woods, gets caught in a tree basically. It talks about it, being held by the head. Some people suggest it was pointed out throughout the text that he has this very long, flowing hair. It's supposed to be, it's one of the outward things that's supposed to make him beautiful, and it ends up kind of being his downfall. He gets caught in the tree. Now, David said don't kill him because it's still his son. He usurped the throne. But I guess we can allow him to have some complicated feelings toward, it's his son. So you can understand that a little bit. Joab has none of it. He says, no, that's not how this is going to go. He does his own part and has some other men kill him. They discard him. In your book on page 88. Oh, and by the way, David wasn't there. They told him not to be at that battle. 2 runners announced the victory to David. When he saw Amiaz, the son of Zadok, coming, he assumed the news would be good. The second man, however, brought the news that Absalom had been killed in the battle. David wept bitterly, despite all the evil Absalom had done. David still loved Absalom and openly confessed that he wished he could have died in Absalom's place. Okay, that's basically, I would have wrapped up with some different stuff. That's technically the end of last week's lesson. And this week's lesson we'll just pick up exactly in the text where this happened. So in chapter 18, look in verse 33. And the king was much moved and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went thus, he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee, O Absalom, my son, my son." And it was told Joab, "Behold, the king weepeth and mourneth for Absalom." And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. And the people got them by stealth that day into the city, as people being ashamed to steal away when they flee in battle. But the king covered his face, and the king cried with a loud voice, "O my son Absalom, O Absalom, my son, my son." And Joab came into the house of the king and said, "Thou hast shamed this day the face of all thy servants, which this day have saved thy life, and the lives of thy sons, and of thy daughters, and the lives of thy wives, and the lives of thy concubines, in that thou lovest thine enemies, and hatest thy friends. For thou hast declared this day that thou regardest neither princes nor servants. For this day I perceive that if Absalom had lived, and all we had died this day, then that would have pleased thee well. Now therefore arise, go forth, speak comfortably unto thy servants. For I swear by the Lord, if thou go not forth, there will not tarry one with thee this night, and that will be worse unto thee than all the evil that befell thee from thy youth until now." All right, we already understood and admit that David has some complicated feelings toward his son. What do you think of David's reaction versus Absalom's reaction? Is either one right or wrong? Do we understand where both are coming from? Or Yep, because Absalom's very dead. So yes, Joab, the commander. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, what do we think about these? David's reaction and Joab's response.
I think it's to be expected. It is his son.
Okay.
However, Joab's not wrong either.
Mm.
And wouldn't, if he's alive, then wouldn't that be the Lord's will? So for him to say, that I will die instead of my son,
Mm-hmm.
almost negates what God had planned.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. Any other thoughts? Is Joab just a big old meanie or what? No?
I mean, I get the whole David thing, but I think he's going to do a overreaction.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably what Joab was kind of thinking too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you feel that way, why are you on from
Mm-hmm.
originally? Why not just let him tell you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I just think you maybe went a little over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I get the whole of the son thing, but
Sure. Yeah.
I kind of get the sense that David wasn't the best father either.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe he's lamenting now,
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and you almost wonder, we had kind of talked about last week how, so when David didn't do the job of a king, so when his daughter was raped, he did nothing about this, kind of forced Absalom to take over for him, do the justice that he wouldn't do. You kind of wonder, So Absalom is responsible for his actions. Did I kind of drive this in a certain direction by what he was doing or not doing in life? There's room for that. There's probably room for a lot here. But yeah, it seems like David's reaction kind of put everyone to shame. Like, it makes the comment that the men kind of like snuck back into the city, like ashamed. It was supposed to be like you welcome the troops back as heroes. There should be parades, there should be songs. But yeah, the troops all kind of like just, yeah, they kind of steal away, like someone who abandons their post. Like, yeah, so it's an odd situation. And again, you're not entirely sure how to feel. Like, you know how you feel, but you're looking at David like, what's up with David now? This whole section of his life kind of feels that way. Okay, in your book on page 90. So remember, we just had a throne stolen, and now that pseudo-king is dead. Confusion reigned regarding the government of Israel. I would imagine so. The northern tribes were insisting that David be recalled as king, like brought back as king, because he had rescued them from their enemies. Meanwhile, David chided the rulers of Judah for their slowness in calling him back. Then, in a strategic diplomatic move, he appointed Amasa, Absalom's former captain, to replace Joab. David quickly received a unanimous invitation to return to Jerusalem as king. And then, when David reached the Jordan River, Shimei met him. Earlier, Shimei had cursed David. Remember the guy who cursed David and threw rocks at him? Now he begged for forgiveness, and David spared his life temporarily. That's a funny way to put that. So yeah, just like David fled the throne, Absalom took the throne, Absalom's dead. It doesn't seem clear to all the tribes that he should be king at this point. So the northern tribes, like the 10 tribes, hey, he's done a lot for us in the past, let's bring him back. And I think the book's a little confusing because they're talking about recalling him as king, but usually when we think of recalling a government official, that means we're actually kicking you out of office. They mean inviting him back. So the tribes of Judah were like, they're hesitant, and the move that he makes is trying to unite these factions. He's taking Absalom's former captain, putting him in charge of his own armies. So he's kind of merging the two thrones. Some of the overhead people, some of the officials, into his own government. So that seems to work out for a bit. All right, let's look at 2 Samuel 19. 2 Samuel 19, we're going to go to verse 41. And behold, all the men of Israel came to the king and said unto the king, Why have our brethren, the men of Judah, stolen thee away, and have brought the king and his household and all of David's men with him over the Jordan? All the men of Judah answered the men of Israel, Because the king is near of kin to us. Wherefore then be ye angry for this matter? Have we eaten at all of the king's cost, or has he given us any gift? The men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, We have 10 parts, 10 tribes represented by the king, and we also have more right to David than you. Why then did you despise us, that our advice should not be first had in bringing back our king? And the words of the men of Judah were fiercer than the words of the men of Israel. So that's a little confusing because we skipped, 43 verses. So there's some internal strife going on because the 10 northern tribes that we're going to call Israel, they immediately wanted David back. 10 of the tribes. Judah and Benjamin, the 2 lower tribes, they were the hesitant ones. As soon as they all kind of band back together and say, okay, yes, let David be king, he goes back to Jerusalem in Judah. So the 10 tribes are like, wait, so you didn't even want him as king for this time. And now you're kind of like, you're taking him back. You're literally taking him to your land. So they're saying, there are 10 tribes that represent us. You only have like 2 tribes. He should be like back up north over the Jordan. He should be with us. So just know there's heavy internal strife. Even though he's back as king, there's still a lot that's unsettled. And that will come up immediately. Page 91 in your book. It says, while the internal strife continued, a troublemaker named Sheba took advantage of the contentious situation and attempted to become the new king. He successfully alienated the men from Israel, those 10 tribes, while those from Judah remained with David on the final 15-mile leg of the journey to Jerusalem. So this guy Sheba, successfully, he takes advantage of this slight upheaval, Israel feeling like they've just kind of been shunted aside a little bit. And he actually sets up his own temporary throne that Israel's like, you know what, fine. We wanted you back. What, you don't want us? You're going back to Jerusalem? Fine, we'll go with Sheba. So once again, he gets the throne back for like half a second, and immediately the country's splitting again. Okay, 2 Samuel 20. We'll start in verse 7. So they have to send more troops back out. And there went after him Joab's men, after Sheba, and the Kerethites, the Pelethites, and all the mighty men, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue after Sheba, the son of Bichri. When they were at the great stone which is in Gibeon, Amasa, that's that new general from Absalom's army, Amasa went before them, and Joab's garment that he put on was girded unto him, and upon it a girdle with a sword fastened upon his loins in the sheath thereof. And as he went forth, it fell out. And Joab said to Amasa, Art thou in health, my brother? Joab took Amasa by the beard with the right hand to kiss him, but Amasa took no heed to the sword that was in Joab's hand. So he smote him therewith in the 5th rib, and shed out his bowels on the ground, and struck him not again, and he died. So Joab and Abishai his brother pursued after Sheba, the son of Bichri. And one of Joab's men stood by him and said, He that favoreth Joab, and he that is for David, let him go after Joab. And Amasa wallowed in blood in the midst of the highway. When the man saw that all the people stood still, he removed Amasa out of the highway into the field, cast a cloth upon him. When he saw that everyone that came by him stood still. When he was removed out of the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue after Sheba, the son of Bichri. Tell me your thoughts on Joab. He's not nice. That's fair.
I think you want a non-nice guy to be military.
That's fair. That's fair. He's definitely got the brutality to go with the job. So, do we remember him doing something like this before? So, when David first took the throne, the competition was one of Saul's sons, Ishbosheth. And you had Abner, who had been the general under Saul. He was the general under Ishbosheth. And finally, as Ishbosheth was sort of like losing it, Abner got fed up and said, Fine, I'm going with David. I'm going to help David take the throne. David was thrilled. Joab, not so much. Remember, that was the one guy that Joab killed because that guy had killed his brother in battle. So it's like Joab just constantly is killing off competition. Because Amasa had his job at this point. David made that political move to kind of try to unite his people. He brought Absalom's general in. And it's kind of funny how in some ways, the one guy seems to just like roll with it. Like, hey, if you're for David, let's go with Joab. Like, okay, there's a new captain in charge, new guy here. Change of leadership. And then they just kind of have to unceremoniously toss Amasa into the field because the whole army stops as they're marching down the road as the guy who is their general is just laying there. So yeah, we're not, while I fully understand what you're saying about you need a brutal warlord in a sense, I don't think we're supposed to be thrilled with Joab as a human being at this point. Okay. But they keep on marching this. They still need to deal with Sheba, who's the one who's actually trying to take the throne. So they chase him into a city. And when they come to this city, we have what the Bible calls a wise woman. Like, I don't know exactly. It's almost like she's like a female elder of the city almost. Whoever she is, she's known to be some sort of judge, some spokesperson for the city. And it's a walled-up city. Joab and the army he just got back is out there. And we're going to look at chapter 20, verse 19. This is the wise woman saying, I am one of them that are peaceable and faithful in Israel. Thou, you, Joab, you seek to destroy a city and a mother of Israel? Why wilt thou swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Joab answered and said, Far be it from me, that I should swallow up or destroy. The matter is not so. But a man of Mount Ephraim, Sheba, the son of Bichri by name, hath lifted up his hand against the king, even against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. The woman said unto Joab, Behold, his head shall be thrown to thee over the wall. Then the woman went unto all the people in her wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and cast it out to Joab. And he blew a trumpet, and they retired from the city, every man to his tent. And Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. Oh, and then, yeah. He did. Yeah, he absolutely did. Yeah. Yeah, just make sure you're not vying for the same job title. Yeah, so no, that's just, so one, we needed to read about, okay, the rebellion of Sheba is put down. I think it's an interesting little thing that's noted in the Bible. It's just an interesting interaction. It's something you don't see very often. Because there have been times in the past, I think probably in Judges, I don't remember the story, but where you have a similar situation where, like, we're after one guy and they won't give him up. I can't remember there's a very specific story in Judges about that, and they end up leveling a city. But yeah, she, in her wisdom, as the Bible says, like, yeah, this guy's no good. Well, no problem with tossing the head over a wall, so there's the ancient Near East for you. All right, and then chapter 21. Then there was a famine in the days of David 3 years, year after year. And David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord answered, It is for Saul and for his bloody house, because he slew the Gibeonites. Now, I'll tell you right from the start. One, do we have any idea who the Gibeonites are? Probably not. So, the Gibeonites were a group back in the book of Joshua. They were the ones who Joshua and the Israelites were starting to conquer. They're the ones who dressed up and acted like they were from far, far away. And they said, hey, we got this moldy bread, our shoes have worn out, we're coming, we're going to try to make a treaty with you. We're from, you don't have to worry about us, we're from all the way over there. Turns out they're like neighbors, and it was a ruse to make Joshua make an alliance with them. Joshua was furious when he found out, but he had sworn in the name of God, so he said, okay, we can't kill them, we'll make them servants, but we can't harm them because we said we wouldn't. So apparently several hundred years later, this is still in place. They're still not supposed to be killing Gibeonites. Apparently Saul did. It's not explicitly stated when this happened during his reign. It's theorized that some of the people involved in the episode where Saul killed the priests, because of where the tabernacle was located, that may have been part of it, but it's unclear. So here the Bible tells us he apparently killed some of these Gibeonites, who was sworn not to kill, but we don't know when. So that's what's happening here. Verse 2, and the king called the Gibeonites and said unto them, now the Gibeonites were not of the children of Israel, but the remnant of the Amorites, and the children of Israel had sworn unto them, and Saul sought to slay them in his zeal to the children of Israel and Judah. Okay. Wherefore David said unto the Gibeonites, what shall I do for you? And wherewith shall I make the atonement that ye may bless the inheritance of the Lord? The Gibeonites said unto him, we will have no silver nor gold of Saul, nor of his house, neither for us shalt thou kill any men of Israel. And he said, okay, what shall ye say? What shall I do for you? And they answered the king, the man that consumed us and that devised against us, that we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coast of Israel, let 7 men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. But the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. So my question here is, how do we feel about that? Like, should David have done this? Is this just? Is this a good thing?
Doesn't particularly feel good because of the seed that we get in the tree to start with.
Yeah.
You know, it's like they lied to scare themselves away and destroy them.
Mhm.
Want to be paid back for basically the deceit.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know, it seems like God holds his people to a higher standard with some of these things,
Okay.
which we're expected to live up to a higher standard too, but everybody's still should live at a certain ethical, moral level.
Okay.
Well, something had to happen, because, right, it was 3 years of famine, so something has to happen. I don't know how they decided this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's blood for blood,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe because it wasn't actually a legitimate war,
Mm-hmm.
and he just slaughtered them, and so then you had innocent bloodshed, and you had killed innocent. Maybe it had to be, like I said, atonement.
Yeah.
It's a pretty tough answer.
Yes, it is.
This kind of situation for that.
Yeah.
How long do you think, how many years do you think went by before the famine and the death of Saul?
Oh.
Or not even the death of Saul. When Saul slew the Gibeonites, when he wasn't technically supposed to,
Mm-hmm.
how many years do you think that was?
Gotta be at least 34 years.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah.
So my curiosity went to, and I'm not judging God.
Sure.
I'm just wondering why the wait?
Mm-hmm.
Like why wait 30 to 40 years? You know what? I'm gonna have a famine
Mm-hmm.
because of what Saul did 30, 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious why that happened.
Somewhat's interesting too because Saul's family's dead by now. So he didn't punish the ones that are responsible.
Yeah.
Just curious.
So it's like he's making these guys guilty for somebody else's sin.
Mm-hmm.
But not even like after the fact. This is 30 or 40 years after the fact.
Yeah.
If it wasn't so long ago, you'd say maybe they were in the conspiracy to kill them too.
Mm-hmm.
Just, and that's the Bible you see once in a while.
Conspiring.
The conspiracy, and then the family is like by relation involved with the situation, they
Sure.
get executed too, so
Yeah.
that isn't helping.
The other thing I thought was, now, and maybe it just doesn't say, see, 'cause we could say this, we could say that line, maybe it just doesn't say for almost anything in the
Sure.
Bible.
Sure.
So my question is, okay, so according to what is not said, David didn't talk to the Lord about it, though either.
Mm-hmm.
Just, because for
Yeah,
a while there, you
that
Yeah.
didn't give him the requirement to settle this.
Right. So he went to God to be like, hey, what's up with the famine?
What's up?
And he told him, yeah, it's because Saul killed the Gibeonites. And that leads us well.
Like he said, yeah, so what do I do with this offer?
Yeah. Yeah, so this leads us well to the book's interpretation. So on page 92, it says, David failed to seek the Lord's guidance in the matter of the famine. Instead, he sought counsel with the Gibeonites. They demanded the death of 7 of Saul's sons as atonement. David carried out this awful request by delivering 7 sons of Saul's descendants to be hanged. Mephibosheth was exempted. The 7 men were brutally murdered, and their bodies hung on the high stakes on a hill and left there for 6 months in violation of Deuteronomy 21:22 and 23. Saul's concubine, Rizpah, the mother of 2 of the slain men, took up a 6-month vigil. She watched over the putrefying corpses day and night to drive away the scavenger birds and animals. When David learned of this lonely, pathetic vigil, he saw to it that the bones of the men, along with the bones of Saul and Jonathan, received a decent burial. Subsequently, the Lord answered David's prayer and lifted the dreadful famine. So, yeah, the book takes that approach that we hit at the end, that it doesn't say that God instructed this in any way. It doesn't seem like David actually sought the Lord, he actually sought the Gibeonites. At the end, he's kind of as generous as you can be after you've just killed 7 people, and he has the bones brought back and has everything buried with their family, and you have that going on. But yeah, that's what the book, that's where they take that.
What's up with the Gibeonites? Now, this is the second time Israel listed the Gibeonites instead of God.
This is true.
What's going on?
They're very persuasive.
What's the deal?
Well, yeah, and this,
It's odd. It's just
it is odd.
the second time they did this, and it's kind of messed up again.
Right. Yeah, and you would almost expect this to come back. Like, you would expect later in the story to be like, oh, well, because you didn't seek the Lord when this happened, and you'd be like, oh, Gibeonites again. But there's no moral judgment on, like, the narrative just tells you what happened. There's no interjection of what God thinks on the matter. But yeah, no, it is interesting that twice you have 2 very specific incidences with the Gibeonites.
But wasn't it the first time that they didn't seek the counsel of the Lord either?
Well, exactly, yeah.
So it's kind of,
Right.
it's not necessarily Gibeonites.
Well, sure. But so immediately after Joshua, there's immediate understanding that you weren't supposed to make a league with any of the locals. You just did it because they tricked you. You allowed yourself to be tricked because you didn't go to the Lord. This time, there's none of that. There's no like, oh, you allowed yourself to stoop to their ideal of justice. None of that comes up. But yeah, so I don't know exactly what we're supposed to see from that. But it's there. Okay, so chapter 21, verse 15. So we're getting into some... This kind of reads like they're war stories, but these are interesting. Okay, so moreover, the Philistines had yet war again with Israel, and David went down, and his servants with him, and fought against the Philistines, and David waxed faint. And Ishbi-Benob, which was of the sons of the giant, referencing Goliath, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, he, being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. And Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, succored him. He saved David, and smote the Philistine, and killed him. Then the men of David sware unto him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us unto battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. So one, just real quick, that's this giant who seemed to be related to Goliath. I guess there are only so many giants among the Philistines. They're all probably closely related. Fighting with David. David's about to lose. He's getting tired. someone steps in and saves him, and they say, okay, look, so in the past we had issues with David not going out to battle when he should have, but now he's getting older, and they're saying, okay, you're not going out to war anymore. He refers to him as the light of Israel. He doesn't want to quench the light of Israel. Having David as the king is more important to them than having him fight in battle with him. But verse 18, some of this giant stuff continues. It came to pass after this that there was again a battle with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbecai the Hushite slew Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. And there was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines, where Elhanan, the son of Jeragorgim, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he was also born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimeah, the brother of David, slew him. And these 4 were born to the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So this doesn't move the story along. It's not a huge plot point, if I can put it that way. But it's very interesting. You didn't expect to hear anything about Goliath again, and you have some sons and at least one brother. And it's interesting that you have some of these like deformities. So you have the one guy with 6 fingers and 6 toes on each hand. And we can't get into giant stuff. There's too much there. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. And yeah, something about the water in Philistia. Something's up there. Okay, so question?
She was asking about giants.
Yeah. Ah, yes. After the class, we can have a whole conversation about Enoch. Yeah. Yeah, Enoch is an interesting topic. It's a very interesting topic. Okay, so we won't read it, but maybe we'll read a verse or two. Chapter 22, verse 1. And David spoke unto the Lord the words of this song in the day that the Lord delivered him out of the hand of all his enemies and out of the hand of Saul. And he said, the Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. And then he keeps going for the rest of chapter 22. So what's interesting is chapter 22 and 23, the first 7 verses, they are 2 songs that get recorded. So what we just started reading, that's actually, it's a whittled down version of Psalm 18. So if you want to read Psalm 18 sometime, it's fairly lengthy, but it's a song of David about God rescuing him from his enemies. And it's a great psalm. I've taken a lot of imagery from it over the years because he portrays God in such a grand fashion. God is like, because you know that what's happening, it's being written because he was saved from Saul and from his enemies. But God ends up being this, I guess he's using Sinai imagery, like the God of, the thunder and lightning, and they're sort of like almost portraying him like a dragon. He's got like fire coming from his nostrils and just kind of consuming his enemies, and it's really violent, which is like in a very, exactly, yeah, it's the Song of Moses. God is a man of war, and yeah, it's really good, but then it has its own switch where like the Lord saved me, he drew me out of many waters, so he tones it back down, but it's a really interesting poetic portrayal of how God rescues him from his enemies, and that's just interesting. And those last 23, the first 7 verses, those are considered the last words of David, and what that seems to imply is that they are the last words that he wrote. So, because he talks later. He has his actual, like, final words later, but this seems to be the last thing that he actually wrote. And I couldn't, like, this doesn't seem to be a psalm that's in our book of Psalms like the other one was. But that's interesting, and it's again about how the Lord being his strength and salvation and stuff like that. Okay, in your book on page 94, it says, a list of David's outstanding men. We talked about this a few weeks ago, his mighty men. A list of David's outstanding men in 1 Chronicles 11 adds to the 37 that are listed here in the honor roll presented in 2 Samuel. 3 men are cited for their heroic deeds. They are Adino, who killed 800 men single-handedly, Eleazar, who stood his ground with David while all others fled, and Shammah, who defeated the Philistines in a field of lentils. And I love that the book specifies lentil plants so that you don't think it's a field filled with beans. As soon as they clarified, I thought the opposite, and it was hysterical. Okay. The last name on the 2 Samuel list is Uriah, the man David ordered slain to cover up his sin with Uriah's wife. Uriah had remained loyal unto death and won many victories for the Lord. In contrast, Joab, David's captain, is not mentioned, while his brothers Abishai and Asahel are honored. Perhaps Joab was excluded because he plotted against David and died a traitor's death. They're kind of giving away the story there. But yeah, Joab is not mentioned, and that is an interesting. It probably would have been insignificant if his brothers weren't listed, because okay, you just didn't list him, but Joab's brothers are in this big list of 37 mighty men. And yeah, like the book says, 1 Chronicles adds some more in their listing of things. Okay. I like question 10 in your book. Why is it significant that the list of men in 2 Samuel is included in the book? What did David accomplish by recognizing his mighty men?
Show appreciation
Mm-hmm.
and acknowledgement.
Okay, yeah.
Giving
Yep.
credit to,
I'm sorry?
giving credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
For all victories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Continue loyalty because they were considered important.
Yeah.
And he recognized that.
Mm-hmm.
So allegiance to loyalty.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like he didn't do it on his own, because David he's the great warrior, poet, king, but he's still got his mighty men. He still needs his group around him. And yeah, okay. So we're going to look at question 11, but I want to read the verses that it has there. So 2 Samuel 23:10. He arose, this is one of his mighty men, he arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand clave unto the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. And verse 12. This other guy, but he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great victory. So question 11. Why is it important to remember that we bless the Lord? Why is it important to remember the Lord when we bless people for their accomplishments? You might not have a good answer to the question because it's an odd question.
Sort of the talent on loan from God thing. Talent, people's talents are
Yeah.
given to them more,
Mm-hmm.
enhanced by God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was almost more worth just like reading those verses and pointing out. They said, so this guy, he stood in a field, he killed all these Philistines, no one else even helped. The Lord had a great victory that day. And then the same thing with verse 12. It was the same format of, this guy did this, the Lord had a great victory that day. So it kind of shows you, like we've discussed many times in the past, but this is on a more personal basis, like the king of the Philistines is coming against us because of sin. So you're like, okay, well, was it the Philistines or did God send them? And the answer is yes. And then in this situation, you have like the mighty men, and you go, man, they did these incredible works. So is this guy, an incredible swordsman, or did God have the victory? And like the answer is yes. So I think it speaks well to the worldview that they have, how men's accomplishments are God's victories when they're for God's purposes. So I think that's just worth pointing out. And how much time do we have? We have about 10 minutes. Let's see where we're getting to. Okay, I think we should be able to do this. Okay. Top of page 95. This will just set up the scene, and you might be familiar with this story. It says, David commissioned Joab and his commanders to take a census of all the fighting men in Judah and Israel. Joab rightly questioned the wisdom of this move, but he was overruled by the king. Joab's men spent 9 months and 20 days walking through the kingdom to take census. Okay, so we're going to move to the text for a second. All right. Chapter 24, verse 10. So we just had a census taken. 24, verse 10. And David's heart smote him after that he had numbered the people. David said unto the Lord, I have sinned greatly in that I have done. And now I beseech thee, O Lord, take away the iniquity of thy servant, for I have done very foolishly. All right, so what the book set up, that's about the setup. He had Joab number all the fighting men, and now David seems very upset about the fact that he did this. And I guess the question is, why is this a bad thing? Why is this a sin that needs to be dealt with?
Because he's trusting in the power of men rather than God. Like when the single man's group is like 800 in one go.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really need an army of 1.3 million
Mm-hmm.
to do the same work.
Yeah, okay.
King's pride,
Mm-hmm.
and also, again, another good one for Joe.
Well, Joab actually was the one who, Joab was like, hey, I don't think we should be doing this. Oh, yeah, because you're liking Joab. Yeah.
So is this more about motive than actual action?
Yeah, because you got to think, there's a book in the Bible called Numbers, which is centered around 2 times that the children of Israel are counted. You know, there are just chapters after chapter of counting people. It's exhausting to read, but that's a book in, the books of Moses.
So there must be the motivation.
Yeah, I would think so. So I don't want to dig into Chronicles has a version of this where they have it being like he was tempted, like to number the people, where it's more of like a demonic influence. And yeah, I have to agree with, both of you about an issue of pride and the issue of so you have your mighty men. This one guy kills 800 Philistines by the power of God, and now you're going to count the soldier. What's your thought process here? Now you're concerned with the size of your army. I thought you were the king who trusted God for all of this. You're not Saul. You're not the person who needs to go out and fight battles. God does that. So I think that's what they're getting at here. And then we'll continue that in verse 11, 24 verse 11. For when David was up in the morning, the word of the Lord came unto the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and say unto David, Thus saith the Lord, I offer thee 3 things. Choose thee one of them, that I may do it unto thee. So Gad came to David and told him, and said unto him, Shall 7 years of famine come unto thee in the land? Or wilt thou flee 3 months before thine enemies, while they pursue thee? Or that there be 3 days' pestilence in thy land now? Now advise, and see what answer I shall return to him that sent me. David said unto Gad, I am in a great strait. Let us fall now into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, and let me not fall into the hand of man. Okay, so that's interesting for a few reasons. One, so David seems to be right that this was a sin, this was an issue of pride and of not trusting the Lord. The Lord agrees, and is going to bring some sort of punishment, and he gives David options, which is very interesting. I don't think we see that nowhere that I can think of in the Bible. And so the options are famine, enemies on the run again, or pestilence, so like disease. He chooses disease, and what he understands that to be is throwing myself into the hands of the Lord. So he doesn't want like human problem, even though disease is a very like, we think of germs. He thinks of that it's sent from God. Yes, the armies would be sent from God, a famine would be sent from God, but this pestilence, that's the option he calls, let us fall into the hands of the Lord. And the reason, which we've talked about before, his instant view, like God is saying, I'm about to bring punishment for sin, for pride, and David again constantly believes God could be merciful. So same thing when the sin with Bathsheba, when that child was laying sick, he said, I'm going to pray, I'm going to fast, I'm going to weep now because maybe the Lord will be merciful. He was told by God, that son won't live. That's part of the punishment, but he still prayed. He said, who knows? The Lord could still be merciful. So mercy, like for a man of war, a brutal, just king who has seen battle after battle, he knows violence and death, his default mode for God is mercy. That's always the first thing that he thinks of when he considers God. Mercy is the first thing. So that's interesting. And then we're going to see more of this, like, I marked it worldview alert. So we're seeing a biblical worldview is what I would consider. So verse 15. So the Lord sent a pestilence upon Israel from the morning even to the time appointed, and there died of the people from Dan to Beersheba, north to south, 70,000 men. And when the angel stretched out his hand upon Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord repented him of the evil, and said to the angel that destroyed the people, it is enough. Stay now thy hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing place of Arana, the Jebusite. David spoke unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people, and said, Lo, I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let thy hand, I pray thee, be against me and against my father's house. And Gad the seer came that day to David, and said unto him, Go up, rear an altar unto the Lord in the threshing floor of Arana the Jebusite. And David, according to the saying of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded. And Arana looked, and saw the king and his servants coming toward him, and Arana went out, and bowed himself before the king on his face upon the ground. And Arana said, Wherefore is my lord the king come to his servant? David said, To buy the threshing floor of thee, to build an altar unto the Lord, that the plague may be stayed from the people. And Arana said unto David, Let my lord the king take and offer up what seemeth good unto him. Behold, here be oxen for burnt sacrifice, and threshing instruments, and other instruments of the oxen for wood. And all these things did Arana as a king give unto the king. Arana said unto the king, The Lord thy God accept thee. The king said unto Arana, Nay, but I will surely buy it of thee at a price. Neither will I offer burnt offerings unto the Lord my God of that which doth cost me nothing. So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. David built there an altar unto the Lord, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord was entreated for the land, and the plague was stayed from Israel. So there's a lot to see here. So some quick answers. What's happening to the people? Just no trick question. What's happening to them? Of what? Plague, pestilence, disease. So the people are seeing a plague. What is David seeing? Right. More specifically, they see a plague. What does he physically see? He sees an angel. Okay, so you're having that interplay of like God. So they're seeing a plague. he sees an angel doing this. So one, that's just, that to me, that's interesting enough in and of itself.
Where does he sit? Can we go back?
Yeah.
Where does he see him, the angel?
Yeah, pretty quickly. So yeah, verse 16, because 15 you had 70,000 men, and 16, when the angel stretched out his hand upon Jerusalem to destroy it, the Lord repented of the evil. And at the end of that verse, the angel of the Lord, he goes by the threshing floor of Arana. Verse 17, David spoke unto the Lord when he saw the angel that smote the people and said, I've sinned. So there's a plague happening, but David is given some sort of spiritual eyes here where he's seeing what's actually taking place. He's seeing the angel. It's interesting that David was right. You think, wow, like 70,000 people, that's a ton of people. But verse 16, God is stopping the angel from smiting Jerusalem with this plague. So like already David called it right. He knew God is merciful. And as soon as verse 16, God is telling the angel to hold back. You don't need to destroy Jerusalem this way. Verse 17, we have David's, like what Ron pointed out, his self-sacrifice. So, and we'll look at this in the last lesson that we do when we kind of point to Christ. There's a theme throughout the Old Testament that these men, these main characters that we have, they are at their best when they are saying, basically sacrificing themselves for the people. So we're going to see a situation with Moses where he says, no, just take me instead kind of thing. Spare them, take me. We have David saying, look, this isn't for their sin. And you get that, his old shepherd language. He calls it, the sheep have done nothing. Take it out on me. This is my sin. So he's trying to put himself in the place of the people who are being punished for sin. And we'll see that later. But so David is kind of, even though it's his sin, he's at his best here in a way because he's giving himself up for the people. He's trying to. That's his prayer. And towards the end of verse 24, we see how he thinks about the nature of sacrifice. And I think it's a good comparison to King Saul, where King Saul would sacrifice out of turn, and he would make other people make sacrifices. David said, no, I won't offer a sacrifice that cost me nothing. And that's a very interesting point. We don't have time to go into that, and I don't even know that I could go into that, but that's worth considering, that if I'm going to give something to God, I'm actually going to give something to God. If I expect him to be, in this case, entreated for sin, well, it can't not cost me anything. That's not sacrifice, and he understood that, and it just speaks very highly of his character. And so the plague is stayed. He buys the threshing floor, sacrifices oxen. The plague is stayed. And I know we're technically over. If we could just finish up the lesson, it'll take a couple minutes, if that. Now we're going to see the actual last words of David. Not the last words that he wrote, but his actual last words. All right, so in 1 Kings chapter 1, let's go to verse 32. Okay, verse 32. King David said, call me Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada. And they came before the king. The king also said unto them, take with you the servants of your Lord, and cause Solomon... Yeah, I skipped something. Okay. Gosh, I think we have to do this next week. I want to give that... I want to give that space. These lessons are so difficult. They pack so much into it. And I guess they just expect you to read the book. People give one answer per question that's asked. Or I don't know if they plan for you to do like a 2-hour Bible study or what, but we easily could have. I skimmed over so much. So yeah, we got to finish that next week. Okay. But for right now, David, so we saw the death of David's son, Absalom, which was all part of his original punishment for the sin with Bathsheba and the murder. So we saw that, and really everything that plays out was kind of also punishment for this sin, because he was promised after Bathsheba and after killing her husband that his reign would be in turmoil the whole time. So even, this guy Sheba coming to power, the strife in the country, this is all a result of his sin way back with Bathsheba. We see him getting older, he can't fight anymore. We saw some stuff about giants. And then, even though his sin in numbering the people, that may not seem like a huge deal. And technically it's just like he did what was incorrect, but then you see, that's what's good about David. Even when he sins, immediately after you see repentance, and you tend to see his heart on the matter. So even as the same thing when the child died, when the baby died, you saw his repentance, you saw his attitude towards the Lord, him still being hopeful and relying on God's mercy no matter what was happening. Even as he sins, even as he knows he's being punished for sin, you see his reliance on God's mercy. And when he relies on that, that's when he's at his best, and it's during this time that he tries to put himself in the place of the people to take the punishment for sin. So there's a lot that we're seeing about David. Even when he does wrong, I don't want to say it ends up good, but you end up seeing the good things and kind of, I guess, what makes someone a man after God's own heart while still being an imperfect human being. So you kind of get a great example of that in David. So we'll end it there. We're a little past, so let's just end it there. We'll pray. We'll come back to this later. Lord, I thank you for this day. Thank you for your word. I would just pray that we can take the lessons, the attitude that we learn from King David, the willingness to always see your mercy no matter what's going on, the willingness to know that we're at our best when we're seeking direction from you and not when we're doing our own things. So I just pray we'd be able to use David, use the example, and try to seek to be a man or woman, a child of God, after your own heart, like David was. So just thank you for your word, and pray you'd bring us back safely next week. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right. Thank you.